Yeah, make this time as an official start time. So everyone who has joined us from across the world, welcome to this webinar on how to do cross-browser testing using TestCafe and Lambda Test. I really appreciate you guys taking your time out to attend this webinar and get to know more about the TestCafe platform and the Lambda Test platform as well. Hope you are all settled in, have grabbed a cup of coffee as well, maybe um, a pint of beer, depending upon wherever you are located, and we can get started immediately as well, right? So a few ground rules. So we are also hosting this webinar over YouTube, and it's going live there. It will be also hosted there once the session ends. We would be also hosting it over YouTube as well. I'll be sending the link to that YouTube video over your registered email ID after the session. There's also an option to ask your questions. There's also a chat window as well. I would prefer that any questions, if you have any questions, feel free to use the Q&A panel overhead. Our team would be either answering it during the session itself, depending upon the questions, or we have a dedicated Q&A sessions afterward where we will be taking your questions, right? So joining me today is Paul Usher. He is a technical evangelist at DevExpress. He has been part of DevExpress team, the team behind the TestCafe plugin for more than 8 years now. And he has been coding, he has been involved with the computer world for many decades. In fact, he has been coding even before I was born. It's not because he is old, but it's because he has been coding when he was age 7, right? So to my introduction, I am Mudit Singh. I'm the Director, Product and Growth here at Lambda Test, and I would be your host of the webinar today. The agenda of this webinar is to get you help started with the TestCafe platform. You would be also running your first automation test. Paul will be helping us out in the features related to TestCafe, how TestCafe can accelerate your automation testing, how it is a very awesome platform to get started with your automation cycles. And we will also look over as well into how TestCafe integrates with the Lambda Test platform, right? So with integrating TestCafe with Lambda Test, you get both good parts of both worlds. You get a awesome platform that helps you run automation test. At the same time, you get a browser coverage and text execution platform capabilities of Lambda Test platform. I also mentioned earlier that we would be doing a Q&A session afterwards as well. So feel free to ask your questions in the Q&A chat option there, and we would be happy to take it maybe during the webinar session itself or afterward the main presentation, right? So I think that's it from my side. Paul, I'm handing over the control to you.
Thank you very much, Mudit. And I'm not sure how I can possibly come in after an introduction like that. Coding since before you were born. It does make me feel old. So, good morning, everyone. And it's always great to see how many people are interested in testing and quality control of their web products. Let's start by talking about the importance of end-to-end tests. As developers, we often use unit tests or test-driven development, TDD, to help ensure the quality of our code. But the reality is we need to test our web apps the way that a user is going to interact with them. And sometimes that can be unexpectedly. If we're wanting a tester to do this manually over and over, it can become really frustrating. It can be demoralizing for teams, and especially when you start looking at things like multiple browser configurations, multiple systems, and regression tests. And that's where automated UI testing can simplify that workload. Now, traditional software-based products required special web drivers or browser plugins, which created additional problems due to browser limitations, version and product compatibilities. And that's why when the team started TestCafe, they wanted an approach that was going to transcend these issues. For example, some of the challenges that people were facing with products like Selenium. Very difficult to set up test environments, especially quickly. Hard to deal with things like new elements appearing on the DOM or creating weights within code. a lot of compatibility issues and having specific drivers for particular browsers, lack of functionality, whether it be reporting, and then things like handling iframes and pop-ups was a lot more difficult. So then why TestCafe? Well, now, first and foremost, it's intuitive and easy to use. It can be utilized by hardcore developers and testers that may only have limited knowledge around JavaScript or TypeScript. You can literally be up and running inside a minute, and I'm going to show that shortly. It doesn't require Selenium or any other software to run. There's no browser plugins. It works across platforms, so you can be running it on Mac OS, Windows, or Linux. It utilizes the latest JavaScript and TypeScript syntax. And out of the box, it works across multiple or all modern browsers, including mobile. And it features some powerful technology for handling things like weights. You can do multiple window testing, cross-origin testing. You can throw mock requests, do client-side injection, full support for iframe, and run concurrent tests. Best of all, it's free and open source. It's licensed under the MIT license, currently has over 8,500 stars on GitHub, and we're running at around 1 million downloads per month via NPM. So what is TestCafe? Well, in short, it's a cross-browser platform that automates end-to-end testing, be it a simple website or a complex web app or service. And it allows you to create tests using modern JavaScript. And whenever I say JavaScript from here on in, it's synonymous with TypeScript. It's your choice. It runs across all popular browsers, all platforms, and as I mentioned, mobile. Now, there are two main components. There's the TestCafe engine, which is the open source framework. And there's also TestCafe Studio, which is our commercial IDE that allows easy to use visual recording, as well as a powerful code editor. Now, today, I'm going to be mainly focused, well, solely focused on the TestCafe engine. The only prerequisite to installing TestCafe is that you've got to have Node.js installed. This is a JavaScript runtime environment that allows JavaScript code to run outside of your browser. And installing Node.js also includes the Node Package Manager, or NPM. Now, we recommend that when you install Node.js that you use the LTS, or long-term support version, although TestCafe will run on both. Now, after you've installed Node.js, you can simply install TestCafe by using that Node Package Manager from a command line, would be PowerShell, or here I'm using obviously Mac OS, and I can run by saying npm install. Here I'm going to do a global install for TestCafe. Now you can install it globally, or you can use it locally in your project. The use of local deployment would be perfect for continuous integration or continuous deployment scenarios. And we support npx, yarn run, and npm scripts. Once I install it by running that npm install, I can then literally start using TestCafe from my command line with a simple fact of TestCafe. I'd want to enter my browser name and then my code file. And then TestCafe is going to run that test in that specified browser. For today, I'm going to be using Visual Studio Code to show you through all the different aspects. And what we're going to do is run through a simple example to make sure TestCafe is working, and then take you through a typical scenario that would be somebody coming in and testing a web application from the start, refactoring the different elements as I learn more about TestCafe, and showing you all of the key parts that make TestCafe powerful. One quick note, if you're installing TestCafe on a Mac, Catalina, or above, you will be prompted to allow screen recording within the security options, and that would be required if you are wanting to use screenshots or video recording. Now, all tests are organized into categories, which we call fixtures. And when we create a JavaScript or TypeScript file, we're going to place our fixtures inside there. And then within a fixture, we're going to create our tests. Now, typically we have one fixture and many tests. And while it's possible to have a single file that can hold many fixtures, we feel it's best practice to do one per file. So taking a look at our first example. And actually, before I jump in there, I've got a TestCafe configuration file set up here. And for the purposes of demonstration, I'm actually slowing down the speed that the test will be run so that you can actually see it suitably over Zoom. If I take a look at our first example file, and what we'll do is explain what's going down through here. We can see that we've got the import statement, which is required to utilize the TestCafe library. And then there's a fixture entry followed by the fixture page function, and that returns a promise. Now, if we take a look at this example page, we can see it's one that was put together by the TestCafe team, and it's great just to, I suppose, cut your teeth or get used to how TestCafe works on things, because it features all of the elements that we'd find on a typical web page. We've got text boxes, we've got buttons, there's check boxes, I've got some list items, I've got a combo box, I've got disabled features that I can enable based on user interaction, and I've also got a text area. So it pretty much has most of the elements that a typical web page would have. In order to run this test, and I'll be going through and explaining the different syntax and the different methods as we go through, so don't feel overwhelmed with some of the code on there. But it is handy to point out that you don't need to be a hardcore developer to work through a TestCafe piece of code. It is very self-explanatory. But the first thing, since I know that TestCafe requires a browser in order to run, is to actually find a list of browsers. And I can do that by invoking TestCafe with the list browsers option there. And we can see that on this machine, I've got Firefox, Chrome, and Safari installed. So I'm going to be using Chrome as my weapon of choice throughout all these tests. Knowing that, I can run TestCafe with my browser name and then the file, which is our example. And what we're going to see is the TestCafe engine spin up. It's going to invoke the browser, and then we can see TestCafe then loading that page, running the test. We see the TestCafe status along the lower of the page. And once the test is run, it's going to return the results back to my terminal. Now, I did mention that I've slowed TestCafe down today so that you can see what's going on. And of course, if you're talking about a continuous integration scenario, you can run TestCafe in headless mode, which means that there'll be none of the visual elements popping up. But here we can see that TestCafe ran the test in Chrome 86 on macOS 11. And we had the name of the fixture, which was TestCafe example, and the test that we ran was fill out and submit form. It passed, and we got the time that it took to actually execute that test. So in review, we can see that a fixture method takes a single parameter for its name. It's got a page method, and that it requires the URL of the page that we're going to be running the test on. Now, today I'm going to be using a mock of a real-world application to give us a feel for the different things that we may want to test. So let me introduce you to TestMu. As it says on the box, it's a companion web application for end-to-end testing with TestCafe. It was put together by a gentleman who has written a book on how to use TestCafe, Dennis Martinez, and it's a great way, again, just to learn some of the more in-depth elements about testing and UI testing. One of the nice things with TestMu is that it brings in functionality that we're going to encounter with typical applications such as authentication, roles, data handling. And the first test I want to do is going to be about authentication, and it's going to be one of the most common scenarios. So if I jump over to my login test, here we can see we've got our fixture, the page, and the test is all about a user can log in with a valid account. Now, before the security conscious jump up and down, yes, I'm using a plain text password today. Typically, you would have this set up inside a vault or some other method, and I'm going to be talking through different elements we can do, but we're going to keep it simple. We can see that the parameter t is passed into the test function is what we call a test controller. And if I bring up IntelliSense on this, we can see that there are a number of methods available for use with that. The next thing to touch on is the asynchronous nature of the calls. TestCafe uses this approach to wait for elements instead of you having to write any code to deal with that. And we can also see examples of method chaining. Now what I want to do is run this test and make sure that what we're doing inside Team Yap is working. Again, we'll see the TestCafe engine spin up. It's going to do the login and return the result. Some of the things that we stepped through may seem a little repetitive. That's again just to get you more comfortable with the processes and steps that we are going to be using with TestCafe. But there was the login, the test passed, and everybody's happy. It could be as well, if you're working with a large number of tests, you want to skip certain ones, and we'll step into that as we move through. But it is a great option to be able to jump, especially when debugging through different elements. The next test I want to do is to actually make sure that I can add a feed into my application. So Team Yap allows you to post comments, allows users to comment on posts, like a typical communications app. We can see again, we've extended from our login authentication code that we now want to type text into the new post text area and hit submit. And then we're doing our actual assertion to say, find the feeds post, find the 0 element or nth element in a text and make sure it contains that same text. There's going to be some really nice refactoring go on as we step through. So stay with me on this. This time I'll run this test up, again, making sure that everything is running as we want. The next step from here, if this test passes, would be I might want to test that somebody can actually write a comment back to that post, and I can step through and do those different elements. So I'm not going to run every test that I've created today, but it's just enough that you can see what's going on. There's the element being shared, the comment got read at the bottom, and we are now good. So moving on from there, I could then extend it further to make sure that somebody can reply to that comment or that post. So what we're now going to move on to as our next topic, which is all about hooks. We're already seeing that before we run any tests, there's going to be some initial setup code or initializer that's going to be run. In the same way, we might want to run some cleanup code at the end to ensure that we've not left any test data running around. So we can apply these hooks. And TestCafe has two types of hooks. It has test hooks and fixture hooks. We'll start by taking a look at test hooks. Now, this allows you to define a function that will be run before and after test execution. So typically, you'd use a test hook to handle things like login or set the initial state of your application if required. Now, a test hook can be defined on either a fixture or a test. Now, stay with me on this one for a minute. A fixture exposes the before each and after each methods. We can see here that in our fixture, we've got before each, and everything inside this block would be run before every test, with the exception that it can be overridden. Likewise, everything in this block would be run after every test, with the exception where it's overridden. And it can be overridden directly in a test itself by using this before method. So when this test runs, because it has this before method, code inside here would run before the test instead of the code in the before each. The second test down here doesn't have that before method, so therefore it's going to run the before each, and likewise any subsequent tests would run before each. And this can be quite powerful. Now, it can be beneficial, especially in cases where you might want to do some data from a third-party API or set a particular page state. And we can see an example here. We've got access to a context object that's available in before each that I can make available inside my test. We can see that we're going to get an exception on the second one because the context is not available at that point. Now, we talked about the test hooks, and now we can look at fixture hooks. So fixture hooks will only run once. So previously it was going to run before every test or after every test. A fixture hook will run once, either before or after. You've got to be careful here because the names are the same and it can get a little confusing. The data is assigned to a fixture hook and it can be shared with a test which is made available on the fixture context. We can see here that this method is going to run once when the fixture executes. We've got our before each, which is going to run before every test, after each after every test, and then after would run once after the fixture is complete. Another quick example of that. And what I've done is I've gone ahead and refactored the code to use hooks to perform the authentication. So instead of me putting the login details into each of my tests, I can now have it in this before each method. We're just going to run this test up just to make sure that the refactoring has worked as we expect. Again, we're going to see that engine fire up, Chrome, and step through. We can start to see as we're building this sample up that there's places that we could refactor and we want to simplify things, particularly around authentication. We can see at this point the authentication happening both times, which is great, remembering that that code is executing from that before each loop. Test pass, and everybody will be happy. So we previously used hooks to manage that authentication, which was a nice refactor, but there's a much nicer way and one that allows multiple role scenarios, because you certainly don't want to be including login details in every test file. You don't want to be logging the user in and out of the app constantly because it's going to waste precious testing time. Now, in most modern applications, there's a concept of roles. You'll have a standard user, you might have an admin role, among others. And if your application implements role-specific UI functionality, you certainly want to test that as well. Now, TestCafe offers the ability to log in once, stay logged in throughout your tests, and it uses browser cookies and storage to remember that login state and switch between it. And this allows a clean, simple way to handle multiple accounts. So how do we set up these roles? Well, the first thing we're going to do is create a helper file. And we're going to move the code for logging in into this helper file. And if we step through this code here, we can see that we've got an import for the roles class from TestCafe. Next, we create an instance of the role and make it exportable, meaning that it can be consumed externally. And then the role method takes the login page, and we're going to perform the same action as before. So we can see that we've added this admin user role to the login page, and just the same as we did. I've also added a regular user, and I think it's about one of the only pages I get away with having more access than Julian on anything. How do I implement this into our example? We can now see that we're actually bringing in our admin user from the helper file. And we can see that instead of having that code inside the before each, we're now utilizing that admin user. One of the things that we're going to see when I actually run this test is that it's not going to actually log in both times. It's going to take that state and it's going to allow me to simply switch back to that user. And as I move forward, we're going to see an example of that when using multiple roles. So I'm just going to run this up, make sure that we see exactly what I'm meaning. You'll notice the first time it's going to use my credentials to log in. It's going to run the first test, but then the subsequent test, which is going to recall the same page, instead of logging me in, it's going to utilize the fact that TestCafe stored those credentials, stored the state, and take me straight in as that user. What we'll do is we'll jump in and see how that looks then if we bring in an additional user. This time I'm importing both admin and regular. We can see that I've got my admin item. I'm going to switch the user role to regular user, and then I'm going to switch the user role back to admin user. This is some of the power of being able to jump in between those different roles. Now, there's also going to be times where you want a non-logged in user or an anonymous role to be able to perform certain tests. You don't have to do anything special to create that. You can simply call this anonymous method inside the use role block. What that's going to do is basically clear out any of the authentication details and act as if the user themselves have not logged in. We can also see here that I'm utilizing the skip option for this particular test. So when I run this, what we're going to notice is it's going to authenticate me the first time. It's then going to authenticate Julian to do a test. It's then going to jump back to my admin role without having to re-authenticate me and then show me the results back in that test. And we're going to see also the results of the anonymous skipped test. Authentication happening now for Julian. He does assure me that that password is only ever used on his internet banking. And there is back to Paul's authenticated user. We can see that the Team App Administrator sections is the fixture. We've run 3 tests, and we've also skipped the anonymous role. So even if you skip a test, it is exported as part of the result set. So far, we've used different selectors to tell TestCafe what we want to interact with, and we've done this either in the class name or ID. We've also seen the use of the nth method. It works, but it doesn't make your test easily readable, and especially if you're bringing on new staff. So there's a better way to encapsulate this in a more descriptive method using the page object model. So let's explain this in a little more detail. It's a design pattern allowing you to separate your logic related from your UI. So I'll start that again. It's a design pattern that allows you to separate your logic that's related to your UI from your test code, making a test easier to read and manage. What we're going to do is take some of the tests that we've already built and refactor them using this approach. So I'm going to bring up my page, my login page model. And we can see here that I'm importing selector from TestCafe, and then I've created this class, which in essence is a list of properties that then uses the selector method to bring the information from the page. I think one of the things that you'll notice here is that, number one, I'm only going to have one place to change my selectors, but I could use my login page model in many places. The other thing is I can have much more meaningful property names inside my page model. We can see that a refactor of our login page test itself is then using the page model with the email field or the password field, and it already becomes more readable, less prone for errors. And if something was to change inside the main codes, UX or UI guy decides to change some class names or anything like that, we're only dealing with it in one place. Again, if we look at the refactor of our page feed model, we can see I've done the same thing, making meaningful property names, and then looking down on the test, we can see that that is a lot easier to work through. Just feels cleaner and makes it more maintainable. I'm just going to run this test to prove that all our refactoring has been working. And we can see that the page model approach is a clean way to do it. There's a lot of power that we can put in behind these page models to perform actions such as clicking. You can interact with other elements. They're going a little bit deeper than we wanted to on today's presentation, but the TestCafe website documentation recipes page has some great examples of what you can achieve with those items. And here's our tests all running. Utilizing that page object model, and happy days, we're going to get green ticks across the entire board. So in all the tests we've carried out so far, we've been using key features of TestCafe. What we're going to do now is actually look at some of those in more detail. The first thing we're going to touch on are selectors. Now, in short, selectors are chainable functions that allow you to traverse the DOM tree in a jQuery style. Now, depending on what element you target will depend on what action or assertion you can or will perform. Now, the powerful thing to remember here is that TestCafe is going to automatically wait for the target element to appear and then fail if the timeout expires. And when I talk about things like timeout, you can control all these different things with configuration inside TestCafe. There's a couple of examples of use cases of the selector. You can see here that I'm finding all elements with a class name of feed posts, or I want to find all elements with a class name of feed posts, but only the ones with a visibility check. And then you can do more complex things, such as using a JavaScript method here to fetch the string located in the browser's local storage. So you can extend the selectors to work with client-side functionality. Here's some examples of the information that would be returned. We can see that with a simple array of feed posts, using nth is going to return the element. However, the final one, the fourth call or element 3 in the array, is going to fail because it doesn't exist. Therefore, your test would at that point fail. There's the ability of using things like with text. So it's going to search for particular elements that contain a text. Now, the thing you've got to note here that unless you're using the case, because you can use regular expressions, you've got to make sure that you're matching cases. So, for example, if we were to use a lowercase f in this first example, it's going to fail. We can get around that by using the case insensitive regular expression. And then you can see an example of returning all of the divs with the text post. As well as things like with text, you can utilize exact text, again, with the lowercase or the casing options. And in fact, there's a number of different selector methods. There's also some search methods. So previously we're looking at filter. We've got the ability of using search methods such as find, parent, child, drill down to sibling, move between next previous siblings. We can also look to see whether an item exists and return a count. So following on from selectors, we've also got actions. We've seen some of these examples that we've been looking through here, and in essence, an action is a fundamental piece that allows you to step through your application applying the human element. And you can see from this list, we've got being able to physically click, typing text, or using just key presses. We can navigate through an app. We can select text, whether it be a text area or a text field. One of the powers of TestCafe is the ability to do things such as hover, being able to work with modal dialogues, resize your browser window, perform complex drag and drops. You can also insert actions to take screenshots or video at any point throughout your test. So that becomes quite a powerful, flexible set of features or actions within your actual test script. To show some of this in place, what I've done is created a page model of the settings page in TeamYap and the application page. And I actually want to run a simple test, which is going to show just how flexible or how powerful that TestCafe engine is when dealing with appearing and disappearing elements on the DOM. So before I run the test, basically we're going to be logging in. We're going to find the area that allows me to upload a profile picture. We're then going to use the upload function to upload that file, make sure the file was updated. Here we're waiting for a toast notification, and obviously toast is something that's going to pop up and disappear. Then make sure that the clear button becomes available, clear the picture, make sure the picture is removed, and then exit. So it's going to give you an idea of quite a complex test featuring items that aren't going to be on the DOM as soon as the page is loaded. We can see that the page has been spun up. Now we're going to move to the settings area. We're actually going to upload the picture file. So we're dealing with dialogues, we're dealing with toast notifications, and then we're waiting for buttons to appear. And at that point, all of our tests have passed with exactly what we wanted. Let's talk about assertions. Now, assertions allow us to verify that the state you expect matches the state it's in. So as the actions were the fundamental piece to human interaction, assertions is the foundation to an automated test. And it's done in the order of expect and assert. And that chain has to be in this order, otherwise it's going to fail. I like to think at this point that for every assertion, there's an equal and opposite assertion. So we've got equals, we've got not equals. Okay, contains, we can check the type of an object, greater than, less than, within a list, not within, and matches. So assertions is that key fundamental for making sure that something has matched everything that has happened or what you're expecting in your page. Now, given all the power and functionality that TestCafe delivers, the next question then is, how do you scale your tests and implement continuous integration testing against multiple machine and browser configurations, aka lambdatest? Well, there's actually a plugin available for lambdatest and TestCafe. Again, using npm, it's as simple as running npm install and then TestCafe browser provider lambdatest. Once you've installed the plugin, there's a few things you need to do in order to use it. The absolute minimum is that you need to set your username and access key. And this is something that's available from your lambdatest dashboard. And Mudit is going to explain some of that in a little more detail shortly. But in essence, once I've installed the plugin, I can simply invoke TestCafe with whatever combination of the 2,000 plus combinations that are offered by lambdatest for my browser version, my operating system, and then my file. Now, because I've already created or set up my lambdatest plugin, Actually, I'm going to cheat and I'm going to just copy this one and run it with one of my tests. So we're going to run on Chrome 74, Windows 8, and we would use just our example test. And realistically, that's all there is to invoking TestCafe. We're going to see that based on the fact that I set up my credentials and my Lambda test API key before, it's now opening a tunnel to Lambda test. It's going to log me in, auth succeeded. And now if I switch to my dashboard, we can see that I've got one active tunnel and there's actually a test in progress. And with that, what I'm going to do is actually switch back to Mudit now, who's going to take us through what happens when you start running TestCafe with Lambda test. Are you there, Mudit?
Yeah, thanks for the great insightful demo, Paul, related to TestCafe and TestCafe plugin, a Lambda test plugin as well. Really great that we got to see more about the TestCafe platform. And of course, I got to learn a little bit as well. As you may know, I'm more of a Java developer earlier, but now I'm thinking about switching over to TestCafe, right?
Well,
So
we weren't going to hold it against you that you're a Java developer, but now you mention it.
So yeah, so to give everybody here a little bit of background, I wanted to give a little bit of background about the Lambda test platform. So as you all noticed, thanks to Paul, he got to showcase the TestCafe platform. And the TestCafe is an awesome tool to manage and run your tests. But a challenge comes on the infrastructure that that test is going to run on. So there's also a question asked about this by a user as well. You cannot have all the browser versions, or in fact all the operating systems at your hand whenever you are building up your test execution, right? So for example, if you are a Mac user, you won't have access to Internet Explorer, or similarly if you are a Windows user, you won't have access to, let's say, Safari browser. Similarly, if you have to scale up your testing, you would have to buy new machines to run those tests on, or go with other options like setting up VMs and upgrading them, managing them. So it's all of a big of a challenge maintaining and developing in-house device labs, in-house testing infrastructure. So that's where Lambda Test comes into the picture, right? We provide you an online browser testing cloud that scales up with a click of a button that you can use to run your tests on. So we have more than 2,000 plus different browsers and browser versions combinations. We have around 350,000 users already running at our already using our platform. And the best part is that we provide integrations with nearly all the major tools here, right? So for example, we have integration with TestCafe as well. So as also Paul mentioned, let me go into a little bit of detail related to how you can run your TestCafe with Lambda tests. So it's nearly as simple as doing an npm install. So this is a command, and of course you would be able to see we have a documentation around this part that will help you get started with this. We have a TestCafe plugin that you can use. We have an npm TestCafe plugin that you can download in with your TestCafe. You just have to do a TestCafe install. You have to set your access key. So whenever you are at Lambda Test platform, instead of calling your normal running your test locally, we are going to run this test over an online grid, right? And that online grid is present at a specific URL. That URL is already provided by the TestCafe plugin, but to access that URL, you would need an authentication and an authentication key, right? So that can be done via logging here into the Lambda Test automation dashboard and going to the key icon here. So you will find your username and the access key. So let me give you a quick example of how you can run the same test at Lambda Test platform using TestCafe, right? So I'm using a simple sample code. So there's an open GitHub repository of this. You can clone it, download it, and maybe play around with the tool itself. There's documentation on how you can get started. But let me give a quick demonstration of how you can do it and how simple it is to run it, right? So I already have this installed at my system. I have downloaded the GitHub repository and everything. I have a very simple basic test. It's quite similar to the Paul's test that I'm opening up a page, the same page Paul showcased during testing TestCafe examples. I'm inputting few parameters. I am uh, clicking few checkboxes, and it's a very, very simple test, right? Basic test. And of course, you can get a hold of this test as well in our GitHub repository. And there's also a TestCafe repositories, GitHub repositories as well that can help you get started with this. There's TestCafe examples, right? So let me start off by showing what are the specific commands that you need, right? So as Paul mentioned, we have to set up the authentication. So the simple command, we are setting the username. We are setting up the access key. Oh, my bad. And there's also an ability that you can use to configure your different desired capability objects that defines what are the different logs and everything that are being generated. I will showcase that as well. But in fact, let me first run a test and showcase how this test is gonna run. So the test execution is the feedback of this test execution you would be able to see in your command interface as well. However, the actual test that you would be seeing would be running on the lambdatest platform, right? So in the same case as in Paul, we are doing it, we are creating a tunnel, we are connecting lambdatest with the code, and the test execution, actual test execution will be happening here at the lambdatest platform. So this is my test that is running at this right now. You can see the live running of your test. And as the test is being run, you would also be getting a feedback in your command line interface as well, right? So you are getting both good things of both worlds. You are getting the feedback that TestCafe gives, and at the same time, the execution capabilities that Lambda Test brings into the picture, right? So as you may notice here, I am using a Windows machine, right? I don't have access to Mac OS, but if I want to see how my website or my web app will look like in a Mac environment, Lambda Test is the platform to go. I'm running the same test on a Mac machine here, and I'm getting a feedback whether my test is going to pass or whether my test is going to fail on a Mac machine. So that's the main value proposition that LabNetTest brings into the picture. Whenever we are running a test, you get a better browser coverage. But that's not all, right? So whenever you run a test, you get multiple logs related to each and every test. So for example, whenever you run a test, our platform automatically takes a screenshot after execution of every Selenium command, after execution of every command, and you just have to define it in your desired capability object. So in TestCafe, to define whether the platform takes these logs like command logs or network logs or even end-to-end Selenium logs, you have to define a simple config.json file like this, and define a JSON format that these are the capabilities that you want to run. So you can define which browser version you want to run your test on. Similarly, what would be the resolution, and everything at our platform is defined by a build and test name. So you can define the build name here as well, right? To help you in building up this desired capability object, we have a simple utility as well. So whichever platform you want to run your test on, this can help you. Whichever the capabilities you want to run your test on, for example, you want network logs, you want screenshot, this is how the desired capability object will look like. So a little bit of difference here in TestCafe is that you have to define while you are running your test, how the test, in which capabilities the test is gonna run, right? So if you look at the test execution command, we will see that it requires lambda test colon Chrome 86 and the browser version. So sometimes it becomes a little bit difficult to get an idea about which browsers are available, which browsers can be used to run your test on, or simply the syntax of this file. So we have a quick utility for this as well. So this is a quick command that you can use in your with the test cafe. What it will do is it will create a complete combination list, like all the browser versions present in a simple txt file. And as you may notice, like we have like thousands of different browsers available of all the combinations. So you can just pick and choose whichever browser you want to run your test on, ranging from the latest version of different operating system, latest version of different browsers, all the way till legacy browsers. So for example, we have all the way till Chrome 27, right? So you can use this to set up your test cafe config JSON file on which browser and operating system you want to run your test on. Another quick example here is to how to run your test in parallel. So what's the use of a cloud-based infrastructure if you cannot scale it up, run multiple tests at the same time, and cut down your overall test execution time? So right now, I just ran one test at a time, but if I want to run the same test on different browsers, different operating systems at the same time, again, the command is as simple as adding more browser combinations with the test cafe list and adding the test cafe test that we want to run, right? So I'm just copying this command. It's gonna again set up a tunnel and run the same code at the lambda test platform. So the value proposition that this running test in parallel, what it brings into the picture is, so if you have, let's say 100 tests, each test take a minute to execute, the overall test build will take 100 minutes to execute, right? However, if you are running tests in parallel, as I'm right now, I'm running 4 tests in parallel at the same time on different configurations, I can cut down my overall test execution time. So if each test took around 1 minute to execute, running in let's say 10 parallel will cut down the overall execution time by a factor of 10, right? And the whole build will execute in 10 minutes. And of course, whenever each test is run, you will see all the logs related to that part that include the command logs, as I mentioned. So this is again toggled using config.js file. You will also see network logs. And this is the latest feature that we have added in the Lambda test platform, is that we have integrated with Lighthouse. So Lighthouse will give you performance logs as well related to your test. Oh, I think I forgot to switch on the performance part. Yeah, I did it. So Lighthouse will give you complete performance statistics related to what the tests perform, what the web page's performance on related to mobile, best practices, and SEO guides. So again, this is something that you can toggle in your config.json file, set performance aspect here as true. And of course, all of this is present. We have end-to-end documentations around this part. So for example, if you want to see how exactly you can get started with Lambda test, we have documentation for this. Similarly, if you want to see how exactly the test cafe can be used, you can get the documentation around at Lambda test cafe sample, and we have documentation around npm package. So that's the core feature set that Lambda test brings into the picture. We are also hitting our time slot. So I'm going to stop here and maybe answer a few of the users' question that we have already here. Right. So Paul, let me know if I'm missing something about the test cafe or the Lambda test platform, and we can move on to the question and answer session right now.
No, I think that pretty much covers everything. I think the key questions that have come through, which we'll just jump in and stomp. First of all, Lambda test is going to allow you to run your tests remotely using any combination of operating systems and browser configurations, which span multiple thousand.
Mhm.
Whereas running TestCafe, you can run those tests locally. You can use TestCafe to run those tests in lambdatest, which is that huge part that we've been through today.
Mhm.
I did mention early on that TestCafe Studio is available. It is a commercial product, whereas TestCafe Engine is our free open source product.
Mhm.
So check out testcafe.com for more information around those. And then over to you for some of the other questions.
So there's a few questions around the lambdatest platform. So our platform has a free trial available as well. So you can get up to 100 minutes of testing for your automation. And of course, the same can be used with TestCafe as well. There's no extra subscription for that required. However, after this 100 minutes expire, you would have to subscribe to uh, parallel session, a premium plan. And using that, you can run unlimited testing with TestCafe or with any other tool of your choice, right? Similarly, there's a question that's a very good question to ask, like which operating systems and browsers you want to or user should run their test on. So this is a subjective question in the sense that, of course, you should try the latest browsers and the browser versions and the latest operating systems always to run your test on, because most of your users would be coming from that direction. But sometimes it is different depending upon location, depending upon geography, and depending upon the audience. A good way to test which type of audience is coming to your website is to check the Google Analytics of your website to see in the technology tab what exactly the users are using to access your website, what type of device they are using, what type of browser they are using, what type of browser version they are using. And based on that, you can plan which browsers should be the top priority for your website, right, for your testing needs. There's also a question related to scheduling a test run using Lambda test platform. So Lambda test is more of an execution side. You can schedule your test run using any CI/CD platform that you may have. So Lambda test integrates with all the CI/CD platforms that include Jenkins, Circle CI, Bamboo, Microsoft Azure, and these kind of platforms can be used to schedule your test run, overall test run, right? There's also a question related to running tests locally with Lambda Test platform. So Lambda Test does have an option to configure what we call tunnel. What it does is that it creates a connection between Lambda Test platform and your local system, and that will allow you to test your locally hosted or privately hosted applications as well at the Lambda Test platform. So it's a very quick and easy setup. There's again end-to-end documentations around this available. This tunnel option is available in multiple flavors that include that there's a desktop application that you can download. There's a binary file. There's also an NPM package for all the JavaScript developers to use this tunnel option, right? Uh, I think we got more of the questions covered. So there's also a few questions around the mobile side. So right now we are providing you testing for mobile as well. You can run your tests on mobile browsers, different browsers as well. So again, that can be set using the desired capability object. Just select whichever browser you want to run your test on.
And the question there, Mudit, is that a emulated browser or is that a real device?
Awesome. So right now we are running on emulators and simulators. We do have real devices as well that you can use to run your test on. However, that is available for on special request. We are gonna go live with a more browser-based, more real device combinations in the future. But if you have any need for real devices, feel free to reach out to us, and we'll be happy to consider your request for providing you with real devices as well. Right. Great. So I think I kind of answered more of the most of the questions.
You covered the ones that weren't already answered. And I'd like to put a big shout out to the teams as well on both lambdatest and TestCafe for doing a fantastic job of answering a lot of those questions as they came through.
Awesome, great. So is there any good question that I think all the users may not be able to see the answered question? So is there any good question that we are missing out? We can give a shout out to that question as well.
I think the big question that a lot of people often ask, and it has been asked today, is how TestCafe compares to Selenium or Cypress.
Mm-hmm,
And there's a few documents that we have available on the TestCafe website. But
mm-hmm,
in essence, TestCafe has the built-in auto wait mechanism. It's
mm-hmm,
plug-in free and doesn't use WebDriver. It
mm-hmm,
works with all the modern desktop and mobile browsers out of the box.
mm-hmm.
And it also allows you to test advanced web pages as well as SPA solutions. So the big thing, of course, is its plugin architecture and its no requirement for other
Mm-hmm.
items to run.
Yeah, so in fact, that is one of the major advantages of TestCafe as well, that it supports all the browsers, all the latest browser versions as well. That include even the browsers that you may not have present locally, right? And to get a full capability out of TestCafe, the platforms like lambdatest helps out in that you get a complete browser coverage at our platform to run your test on. So there's also a question related to whether the TestCafe can be used to run on Internet Explorer even if you do not have Internet Explorer at your local machine. So that's where lambdatest comes into the picture. So Test Cafe can be used to run tests on Internet Explorer and all these browsers as well. If you do not have present them locally, feel free to log in into lambdatest platform, integrate with Test Cafe, and then you can run on those browsers and browser versions.
Perfect.
Great. Any other good question that we are missing out?
I think we've covered just about everything that was. There's a few. That was an important one. There's me
Mhm,
stuttering and stammering for a second. Is of course it was run on YouTube. There
mhm,
is going to be a recording of the entire presentation up
mhm.
on YouTube after we finish. So anybody that did miss it, yes, you'll be able to rewatch it and just keep going back through and covering the things that we've been going through.
Great. Yeah. So of course, all of this recording would be available at YouTube platform. We would be, if you have registered, we would be sharing you with the YouTube link on your registered email ID. Feel free to go through that recording, and if you have any question, feel free to leave a comment over that recording as well. Otherwise, a good thing about Landmatis platform is that we have a very fast chat support. Just feel free to come here and ping us with any question that you may have related to Lambda test or even test cafe integration. We would be happy to point you to in the right direction, right? So we have real people coming monitoring our chat support. These are not bots. So anytime you face any issue or have any onboarding issues or have any problem in getting to know how to get started with, just feel free to ping us here, and there would be somebody out there to help you out in this support. Right. Similarly, if you have any questions related to Test Cafe, again, you can obviously ping us here, and we would be happy to connect you with Paul and his team. Otherwise, you can also check out the DevExpress website and get to know more about the platform from over there. Right.
Definitely.
Awesome. So I think we covered nearly all the aspects, and we can shut down the webinar for this time. So first, Paul, I really wanted to thank you, Paul, and the team as well, who has joined us and helped us with all these answers. I really appreciate you guys joining us today, walking us through the Test Cafe platform, and making this webinar a success as well, right? And helping, of course, with all the questions and all the answers.
My pleasure. And thank you for hosting us. It's been a lot of fun.
Yes, yes, it has. Most probably, we would be doing it again as well, like if the users require this as well.
No problem. Look forward to it.
Look forward to it. Right. So all the users who have joined us, again, thank you for taking your time out and joining us for this webinar. Again, this would be hosted over the YouTube, and you will be able to go through the recording. With that note, allow me to sign off. Have a great day, everybody.